The invitation to my wife's family dinner sat on the counter all week, and I stared at it every day, feeling the same knot of dread. I'm David Kane, 34, an accountant, careful, precise, and quiet. I keep my head down, work hard, and do my best for my wife Claire and our daughter Emma. I'm not flashy, never have been. But the Kane family loves flash. Expensive suits, designer watches, lavish homes, and eyes that judge everyone who doesn't fit. When I arrived at the estate, I parked my modest car next to a line of SUVs and Teslas, feeling out of place already. Claire squeezed my hand, smiling nervously, and whispered, "Don't worry about them." I nodded, knowing it wouldn't matter. Inside, the dining room gleamed. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished mahogany, golden cutlery lined the table, and the smell of rich food made my stomach twist. My father-in-law, Harold Kane, stood at the head of the table, hands behind his back, wearing a tailored suit and a grin that looked like it belonged on a billboard for power and arrogance. He gestured for everyone to sit, and I felt the weight of 50 eyes scanning me. Not a welcoming glance, just assessment, judgment, humiliation waiting to happen. Conversation started small, polite, but Harold couldn't resist. He leaned over and said loudly enough for several people to hear, "You know, David, not everyone can manage a simple job without spilling numbers, right?" Everyone laughed, including Claire's younger brother and her cousins. I froze, my face hot. My job isn't glamorous, but it keeps us afloat, and I've never asked anyone for validation. But validation didn't matter here. He continued, mockery dripping from each syllable, questioning my salary, my car, my apartment, even the clothes I wore. Claire put her hand on my arm and said quietly, "Don't respond." But I could see her tension, her fear of Harold, of what he thought I was. The insults weren't subtle. They were surgical, precise, meant to wound, and everyone at the table enjoyed the spectacle. I felt Emma tug at my sleeve, confused and worried. My chest burned with anger, humiliation, and the instinct to protect my daughter. I could either swallow the shame and remain silent, or do something that would make Harold Kane regret underestimating me. For 20 minutes he continued his performance, each comment punctuated with laughter, each glance at me a challenge. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a family dinner. This was about respect. This was about pride. This was about showing my daughter what standing up for yourself looks like, even if the world seems stacked against you. I knew I had to act, and the opportunity would come soon. Harold Kane had no idea what was about to hit him. Harold Kane's laughter echoed across the dining room, sharp, deliberate, designed to embarrass. I stayed seated, breathing slowly, watching him flaunt authority like it gave him ownership of everyone else's dignity. Claire's hand squeezed mine again, silent apology, silent warning, but I couldn't look away. I saw Emma fidgeting in her high chair, her small hands clutching the edge of the table, sensing tension she didn't understand. This was supposed to be family, warmth, connection, but Harold had turned it into a courtroom, and I was the defendant. Then it happened. He leaned over again, pointing at my modest watch and cheap cufflinks, announcing to everyone at the table, "David, when you buy a proper watch, maybe we'll take you seriously." The room tittered, forks paused mid-air, wine glasses rattled slightly as people waited for my reaction. I could feel my pulse, a slow, steady beat of controlled rage, calculating. This man thought money defined character, thought appearance defined respect, thought fear defined power. He was wrong. I smiled, faintly, the kind of smile that makes people nervous without understanding why. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. Everyone leaned in automatically. Harold's eyes narrowed. I tapped a few keys, brought up my screen, and projected a spreadsheet onto the wall where the chandelier cast soft reflections. A detailed audit. Numbers, company names, transactions. The kind of work only someone who understood accounting could follow. I didn't speak yet. I let the room absorb the data. I let eyes flick from spreadsheet to spreadsheet. Then I said, "Each number here traces back to the Kane Holdings accounts you've overseen personally, Harold. Every single discrepancy, every miscalculation, every pattern of favoritism and embezzlement hidden behind corporate accounting jargon." My voice was calm, quiet, precise, but it carried. I could see faces blanching, Claire gasping softly, cousins turning pale, even Emma looking confused. Harold Kane froze, one hand hovering over his wine glass, realizing suddenly this wasn't a joke. This wasn't about my watch or my car. This was about truth, about facts, about accountability. The spreadsheet was public records combined with internal financial reports accessible through careful research, all compiled meticulously by me over months without anyone noticing. A slow, heavy silence filled the room. Harold Kane's confident grin vanished, replaced by a twitch of panic. I looked at him directly, and for the first time that night, he didn't speak. He couldn't. I had the room. Everyone could see the power he assumed was his had limits. Everyone could see the man he tried to humiliate had weapons of knowledge he could never imagine. And in that moment, I felt a surge of quiet triumph, the kind that doesn't need applause, only acknowledgement. The shift had begun.
Harold Kane's face turned red, veins standing out as he tried to speak, but no words came. Everyone at the table leaned in, silent, waiting for an explanation, any defense, and he had none. I set my phone down slowly, letting the gravity of what they'd just seen sink in. Claire's hand found mine again, a brief squeeze, steadying me, reminding me I wasn't alone. I glanced at my cousins, at my parents, at people who had always underestimated me in family dinners, at people who thought my modest job defined my worth, and they were watching in shock. Shock and something else. Respect. Finally, Harold's voice broke through, strained, barely audible. "David, this is not how I expected tonight to go." I leaned back, still calm, letting the spreadsheet linger in their minds, letting the room absorb every number, every link, every truth. "I don't respond to expectation, Harold. I respond to reality. I see things, I track things, I know things that matter. The things you thought were invisible aren't." The smirk he wore at the start of the evening, the arrogant leaning back in his chair, was gone. He was suddenly small, diminished in the space he had tried to own. Claire's voice finally broke the silence. "I knew," she said, shaking slightly. "I knew he was right. Everyone else looks at me funny sometimes, but he's always been precise, careful." I looked at her and nodded. "Yes, that's why I'm here tonight. Not to embarrass, not to start a fight, but to expose what was hidden, what everyone thought they could ignore." Harold Kane swallowed hard. "You're making a mistake," he stammered. "No, Harold," I said. "The mistake was thinking you could humiliate me in front of my family and that it would go unanswered. Every calculation, every record, every public filing I pulled together proves the truth. And the truth is this: your arrogance, your condescension, your false confidence in appearances, all of it is meaningless when faced with facts." The room was silent again, heavier this time, like everyone realized what had been hidden for years. Harold's wife covered her mouth, eyes wide, murmuring something to her daughter. My uncle cleared his throat, muttering, "David, this is—" I ignored it. The night wasn't about explanations. It was about consequences, about turning tables in the quietest, most precise way possible. And Harold Kane had just learned the hardest lesson. Never underestimate the man who studies, who observes, who prepares, not just for himself, but for those he protects. The room still hung on a tense pause, but I didn't flinch. I sat back, the calmest man at the table, while everyone else tried to process what had just happened. The silence stretched, thick, almost suffocating, and I didn't move. I let everyone in the room sit with the weight of what had just happened. Claire's hands still rested lightly on mine, grounding me, reminding me this wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about balance, about making people realize the truth when they refused to see it. Harold Kane finally lowered his eyes to the table, his pride crushed. I could see it in the tight jaw, the quick blink, the way his hands gripped the edges of his chair. My parents, normally reserved and cautious, exchanged glances, pride flickering in their eyes. That pride wasn't for me, not entirely. It was for the principle, for the fact that truth had finally cut through lies and arrogance. Claire leaned closer, whispering softly, "David, you don't have to stay here." But I didn't. Not yet. I had one more move. I pulled out another sheet, one that summarized the contracts, the emails, the subtle threats, and the moments Harold had assumed no one would notice. I passed it slowly to each of the senior relatives at the table, letting them read it themselves. Their faces shifted from curiosity to shock to quiet realization. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't gossip. This was proof, and proof was unstoppable. Harold tried to interrupt, tried to talk over me, tried to turn the room back in his favor, but no one listened. They were listening to the evidence, to the truth, to the reality he had ignored for years. Finally, I stood, calmly, collected. No theatrics, no shouting. I had never raised my voice, never threatened, never lost control. And that control, that quiet authority, was far more powerful than any outburst he could muster. I looked around the table, eyes meeting each family member's, and said simply, "The truth doesn't bend for ego. It doesn't hide behind wealth or appearances. It exists, and when you ignore it, it has a way of finding its place." Harold's face was red, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. Claire squeezed my hand again. We stood together. I turned to Harold. "Consider this a lesson," I said. "One you won't forget." We left the table, walked out of the house, and didn't look back. Outside, the night air was sharp and clean. I exhaled, finally letting my shoulders relax. Claire smiled faintly. "That was perfect," she said. I nodded. Sometimes the quietest actions, the calculated moves, the unspoken power of evidence speak louder than 1,000 angry words. Harold Kane had learned it the hardest way, and everyone else had seen it too. We didn't need approval or applause. The night had proven what mattered: precision, patience, and the courage to confront lies with facts. And as we walked away together, I realized something crucial. Winning doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like quiet, undeniable justice, the kind that leaves no doubt who was right all along.